All right, welcome to your first flexibility recording and lecture. You're going to be watching this video as part of your flexibility unit for your Fitness for Life class, which you're taking online through Davis Connect, and I will be delivering some of your virtual instruction. And then keep in mind that you also have your actual teacher who is administering the course with you that you can reach out to at any time. If you have any questions on any of this material, feel free to reach out to your instructor through email, or through Canvas. So as we get into these lectures, it's really important that you follow along as best you can, that you fill out any study guides that were assigned along with this lecture. And then make sure you take really good notes, because there's typically a quiz that goes along with the information from this lecture or from these lectures, and they're based directly off of what's covered in these lectures. So do your best to pay attention. You'll notice that we have down at the bottom of your screen, we've got some hopefully what will be good closed captioning. So if you need that, that's down there at the bottom. But a lot of the stuff, the information that we cover in these lectures will be covered on your screen as part of the slide. But sometimes I will offer additional commentary, so you may want to listen to this. And then this is also a provided recording, because a lot of students like to hear the audio or the explanation of a lot of the things that are on these slides. So instead of just publishing this deck of slides, which you're welcome to just look through on your own if you want to, this presentation has been provided for your benefit. So since this is the first lecture you'll be participating in on this flexibility unit, we want to just remind you that flexibility is one of our 6 components of fitness, okay? In this course, you'll study what we call the 6 components of fitness. And the reason we study 6 components of fitness is because fitness is not just about any one of those things. Like a lot of times we get these ideas of what a person who is fit is, maybe somebody who looks really strong or somebody who goes running a lot. And while those people like that may obviously be fit, they also might be lacking in some areas of fitness that they could benefit from if they put a little bit more attention into those areas as well. So you would have studied earlier in an earlier assignment what those 6 components of fitness are. Today we're going to be introducing flexibility. Let's see if we can get this here to, there we go. So so this is typically covered in Term 1. At some point, this could potentially be changed and covered in Term 2, but for now, you're probably studying this in the current term that you're taking. The objective of this presentation is to help you do a few things. First of all, we want you to understand what flexibility is and why it's important, okay? We want you to understand which muscles are the most important to stretch and why. So you have hundreds, right, of muscles in your body, and there's several really important muscles to stretch frequently, and we'll talk about those and then why that's important. We'll talk about a principle called specificity and the difference between different types of stretching. So there's lots of different ways to stretch, and we're going to cover what those are, so you can understand those and which ones are good for you, which ones aren't so good for you. And we'll get into a little bit about the FIT principle. If you've had a physical education class before, you've probably talked about a principle called FIT, or FITT, which stands for frequency, intensity, time, and technique. All right, so that talks about if you want to improve in something physically, how often you do it, how intense to do it, and how long to do it, and then, of course, the technique to do it correctly. We'll talk about safety concerns involved with stretching. It's always important to be safe. We don't want to have undue injuries. And so we'll talk about safety concerns. And then we'll also show you a couple things about how to test your flexibility. The learning goal, of course, is to learn the stretching techniques, what their value is, why to do them, and then be able to perform various stretches and flexibility tests. So flexibility is the elasticity or compliance of muscles when stretching. Your muscles, to some degree, have some degree of elasticity, which means they can stretch a little bit and they can still work right, without being damaged or injured. And so what we do with flexibility is we want to make sure that you have a healthy amount of elasticity in your muscles, in your tendons, in your ligaments, and in your tissues, so that your body can have full range of motion, something we call full range of motion, which is your joints' ability to move fully and to contract fully. So some examples of joints, all right, is basically a joint is any place in your body where two bones come together, right, where bones come together. Examples might be your ankle, right, or your knees, your hips, your wrists, your elbows, and shoulders. We'll talk a little bit more about these as we go in this presentation. So when we talk about range of motion, this is the first really big principle that you need to understand when we talk about flexibility. Range of motion basically means how much a joint has the ability to move based on how your body's built, okay? It's, for different joints in your body, you'll have different types of joints, and different types of joints allow different types of movement. Okay, we'll get into those a little bit later. But when we talk about range of motion, it's basically allowing that joint to flex and extend fully. Okay, gymnasts have a large range of motion around the shoulder joint, for example. Hurdlers have a large range of motion around the hip. Range of motion is limited. It can be limited by your ligaments, your tendons, your muscles. Okay, so those are three parts of your body that you need to understand what they mean. Okay, so make sure you're taking good notes on this part. So a ligament is a tissue that attaches a bone to a bone. Okay, so I'm just going to grab my little laser pointer here, and you can see right here in your hand all this little white tissue from this bone to this bone, this bone to this bone. Those are ligaments. Okay, you got ligaments in lots of different joints in your hand, and lots of different places in your body. Okay, you also have what are called tendons. Tendons are these things over here. Let's see here if I can do that again. Okay, these are your tendons right here where you're basically attaching a muscle. Here's your muscle, right? This is an example of, looks like your bicep. Yeah, that would be your bicep muscle. And it attaches to a bone, okay? So where muscles attach to bone, we call those tendons. So there's a difference. Sometimes people think, oh, I tore a ligament. No, this isn't a ligament. This is a tendon. And then this, of course, is your muscle, okay? We'll talk a little bit more in this class about like what muscles do, how they cause movement, why they are able to move, and how to help make them be stronger, and things like that. But that's a different unit. But basically, in this unit, we want to talk about flexibility and really allowing these joints the ability to move in a safe way and to have full range of motion. So when you think about this, just think this to yourself. What primary joints in the body benefit from a greater range of motion, particularly when it comes to sports participation? All right. So a lot of you students that are taking this class might be involved in different sports. If you do a sport, whether it's at your school or whether you do a sport on your own that you do that's maybe not necessarily a school sport or activity, think about that activity, and are there certain skills or abilities you need to have in that sport that require a specific range of motion or a greater range of motion in particular joints. Another thing to think about too is also just like functional activities in your life, just the ability to kind of live life, to go places and do the things that you want to do that are just kind of regular life activities. You know, having proper range of motion is important for that as well. Some examples of joints that should have good range of motion, especially for people who are doing sports or other activities, are your ankle, making sure you have good mobility in your ankle, good range of motion in your hip, and then also in your shoulder joint, okay? We're going to talk a little bit about different types of joints, so make sure as I talk about these types of joints, you keep in mind what these types of joints are. All the joints, well, I guess those joints that we talked about just now, your hip joint and your shoulder joint especially, are kind of good examples of what we'd call a ball and socket joint. So ball and socket joint would be the first type of joint. You need to know what that is. So if you look over here on the right of your screen, you can see right here, this is a shoulder joint. You can see this is the humerus, or the upper part of the arm. And what it does is it has a ball, kind of like a very rounded, it's a very smooth, rounded part of the bone up here at the head of the bone, where it attaches into a socket, right? That's the same size in this acromioclavicular joint, just below the acromioclavicular joint. This is the glenohumeral joint. So so where that attaches, it's like a little ball in its socket, and it allows this bone to have a huge range of motion. It can go up, it can go down, it can go forward, it can go backward, it can spin in a circular motion because of this rounded edge. Your hip, if you look over here at your hip, joint, same kind of thing. You have a ball shape head of this humerus where it attaches into your hip joint and allows that same kind of motion, that ball and socket joint. Okay, they promote movement in many directions. So you'll see things like rotation, flexion, extension. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Okay. Your knee and elbow joints are known as hinge joints. This joint up here that you see is your elbow. This is what an elbow joint looks like. And you can kind of see an elbow rotates back and forth, right? Kind of like a hinge, like a door hinge. So it can come this way and flex. We call that flexion when it closes. Or it can extend and open. We call that extension. So flexion and extension is what you have with a hinge joint. Okay? For sports performance, it is important for major muscle groups to be flexible. So some of your major muscle groups that you need to know what they are, and you may need to look some of these up if you're not familiar with them, but your hamstrings, okay, are the back part of your upper leg, okay? Your calf muscles are the lower part of the lower back part of your leg. The muscles of the lower back are important to have flexibility. The hip flexors, part of your leg, your leg and your hip muscle, your hip joint area, and then the muscles of the shoulder. Okay, your deltoids, your rhomboids, and some of those bigger muscle groups. Flexibility in these areas enhances performance and reduces the risk of injury. So you'll see sometimes athletes or even just people go out and do their activities, which that's fine, but you are at greater risk of being injured and then not being able to do your activity if you don't take the time to make sure you warm up your muscles and stretch them. Make sure you pay attention to that flexibility. So why should we stretch? It's not just for athletes. It's for improved function, just for overall health. People who are more flexible tend to have better health in a lot of ways in their life. So we want to be able to do the activities we want to do in our life, not just sports, but yes, also sports. And so flexibility can help us do those things better. And then there's actually a lot of evidence that shows that by actively working on your flexibility, you can actually improve other aspects of your health as well. Flexibility helps reduce the risk of injury, and that's a huge one. If you do athletics or you like to be active, there's one of the frustrating things about injury is that you can't do your activity for a while until you're healed up, depending on what your injury is. And so being flexible can help reduce the risk of injury, which can keep you active more often throughout your life. Stretching short muscles helps improve posture and helps to prevent post-exercise pain and soreness. So that's obviously a good benefit. And then good posture helps prevent or relieve back pain and helps to reduce fatigue and emotional tension. So why should we stretch? For elderly people, flexibility helps prevent joint aches and pain. So it's always nice to have obviously less things that just kind of annoy you and make life kind of difficult. So flexing can help, or flexibility can help prevent pain and joint aches. Stretching exercises can often alleviate menstrual cramps in women. And stretching also gives athletes greater range of motion for faster forward movement and more power. How is flexibility affected with age or inactivity? As you go throughout your life, you will lose range of motion and flexibility as you become inactive and as you age. So staying active, even though you are going to age throughout your life and you can't change the fact that you're going to age, you can stay active, which will actually help you maintain good range of motion and flexibility. Types of stretching. Let's get into this a little bit. So some of the types of stretching that we'll get into are called static stretching, dynamic stretching, ballistic stretching, passive stretching, and what's called PNF. We'll get into that in just a second. Static stretching is probably one that you've been familiar with if you've taken a PE class in school or if you've done sports. A lot of different athletics or a lot of different activities encourage static stretching. It's also called active stretching, but it basically involves stretching and holding a position for anywhere from 10 to 30 seconds. Okay, it's very safe and it's commonly recommended because it's less likely to cause injury. It's especially beneficial for people who have arthritis, muscle or joint pain, or bad back. So it's a really safe way to stretch. Okay. And by the way, we will get into different types of stretches and different stretches you can do on your own when you're exercising. But for this, we're just kind of talking about the different types. You'll learn to recognize these in some of the materials that we provide you. Dynamic stretching is more of an active, moving type of stretch, right? It's where it involves movement. So, or swinging motions of the joints or limbs through a full range of motion to reach a stretching point. So notice that I said full range of motion, so that we don't want to just stretch like partially. We want to make sure when we dynamic stretch, we're stretching through a full range of motion and really opening up that joint and allowing it to do what it's able to do. So you can see in this picture right here, this person is kicking their leg from the standing position up to a kick, reaching down with the opposite hand at the same time, and then the foot comes back down and they'll bring it back up. Sometimes they'll come back here, kick it up, kick back, kick it up, and you can see that it's stretching this hamstring and glute part of the body. So leg swings are a common example. Arm circles, if you circle your arm, sometimes athletes will get out here and like circle their arm in nice big swings. I can't do it obviously here on my camera and with all my equipment here, but yeah, it's just these big arm circles. Neck rolls, rolling your neck, and then trunk twists would be other examples. Ballistic stretching is another type of stretching that you don't see as often, and it's because it can be a little bit dangerous. It's a technique that uses bouncing to the desired position to increase flexibility. But the issue with this is it can result in muscle pulls and strains because it activates the stretch reflex rather than lessens it. This stretch is not recommended for most individuals, and especially not for individuals with chronic injuries. It is best used with athletes who use this movement in their particular sport, such as gymnasts or jumpers. Passive stretching is another type. It involves holding a stretch for 15 seconds or more as someone pushes or pulls the part of your body that you want stretched. So if you ever go to like a physical therapist's office, sometimes they'll actually help you stretch, and they'll kind of have you relax while they do the pushing or the pulling to help stretch out the muscle or the joint that they want to stretch. With assisted stretching, you relax the muscle you're trying to stretch and rely on the external force to hold you in place. You don't usually have to work very hard to do an assisted stretch, but there's always the risk of that the external force will be stronger than you are flexible, which could cause an injury. So if you ever do this type of stretching, you should only do it with somebody who really knows what they're doing. You'll see sometimes in like gymnastics gyms where there's, gymnasts are going through like very specialized training. They might work with a coach who helps do passive stretching with the athlete in order to help increase some flexibility that on their own they may not be able to do quite as much, but you have to make sure you're working with somebody who really knows what they're doing. Otherwise, you could see, the risk for a lot of injury if you have somebody just pushing you down farther and they don't know what they're doing. So, passive stretching is something that's sometimes used in specialized circumstances. This last one's called PNF stretching, which stands for proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. Now that's a mouthful, isn't it? Proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. Okay, it's basically a type of stretching that is more effective for improving flexibility. It involves contracting the muscle before you stretch so that it can stretch farther. Okay, you stretch a muscle like the quadriceps and then stretch the opposing muscle to it immediately after hamstrings. So we'll talk about this a little bit more in the muscular strength and endurance unit. But basically, muscles typically have what we call an antagonistic pair, where there's an opposite muscle. When one muscle's stretching, its opposite muscle is contracting, and so PNF stretching involves targeting those two opposing muscles and stretching one. So one is contracted while the other stretches, and then you do the opposite so that they kind of switch. So how do the purpose of the FIT principle with flexibility is using this in your stretching to help improve your flexibility by doing it frequently, right? Frequency is an important part of this. Frequency will give you the consistency that you need to be able to see some improvement. Okay, if you only do stretches like once a month, obviously you're not going to see improvement. So it's recommended that you stretch each muscle group daily or at least 3 times a week. So minimum 3 times a week, but daily is ideal, okay? Intensity. Okay, so how hard to stretch, how far to push yourself. You must stretch the muscle beyond its normal length. So when you're just at rest, what that muscle can do in order to improve your flexibility, you have to go a little bit beyond that. So typically you'll hear somebody say, go until you can kind of feel that stretch. You want it to it should be a little uncomfortable, but it should not be causing like a dangerous type of pain. Okay, so you want to use enough intensity to stretch the muscle beyond its normal length. The amount of time that you should do is typically 10 to 30 seconds for each stretch. Okay, rest for 10 seconds, then repeat 3 to 4 times. And then the type or technique, okay, is static stretching for various muscles. So the type of stretching you'll be doing typically is recommended for this course is going to be static stretching, and you'll have an assignment a little bit later on in which you'll learn what that looks like and how to do those. Some safety concerns. Before you stretch, it's always important to warm up before stretching. So if you haven't done a lot of this before, basically when you get out and you get moving with a little bit more intensity than just walking, your body will actually start to warm up. That your blood flow will open up into your muscles and it will warm those muscles up. Okay, cold muscles don't stretch as easily and can be more prone to injury if you try to stretch them too hard when they're cold. So we want to warm them up first. So typically like running, jumping jacks, a lot of body, full body movement for, anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes, depending on the sport and the activity you're going to be getting involved in is typically recommended. So a good warm up. Do not stretch swollen joints or joints that are hypermobile. So sometimes, people will try to push joints a little bit too hard. So if you have swollen joints, you don't want to be pushing those too much. And if you have any issues with injuries, it's always a good idea to talk to somebody who knows what they're talking about. So a physical therapist or a doctor or an athletic trainer at your school can help you know when is a good time to be stretching, like an injury or something like that. So you don't lose too much range of motion, but also allow your injury to heal. If you're feeling pain, like I said, kind of like you can tell something's causing a kind of a damaging pain, obviously stop. And then avoid dangerous exercises. So especially with the back and neck, there are some exercises you can do that can be damaging to your back and neck. So just in general, just avoid those. You want to take good care of your back. You want to make sure you have, as much mobility and pain-free mobility throughout your life as possible. And the better you take care of your back and your neck now while you're young, the more activity you'll be able to have when you're older as well. Principle of progression, this is important to understand. Gradually increase the intensity. So stretch farther and hold longer as you progress. So you can see in this picture here, this athlete is stretching her hamstring. And, at this point, she might only be able to, she's pretty flexible here, where she's able to get her nose that close to her knee. With time, her back muscles might become a little bit more limber, and her hamstring might be a little bit more limber to where she'd be able to get even closer to her knee and have even more of a thorough stretch of that hamstring muscle. All right. Principle of specificity. All right, we talked about this. Flexibility exercises improve only the specific muscles at the specific joints that you stretch. To develop overall flexibility, you must stretch all the muscles that need stretching. So you can see in this picture right here, these are some different stretches that you can. I actually have some videos that we'll share with you in a different assignment. But if you want to improve the flexibility of your hamstrings, you have to obviously stretch your hamstrings. Okay, if you want to improve the flexibility of your back or your spine, especially in like a rotational type of way, spinal twist would be the way to do that. Okay, knee to your chest is going to be another hamstring and glute stretch. Your calves, where you're kind of pushing your heel down to the ground right here and getting the stretch of this back, this big muscle right here, which is your calf muscle, or your gastrocnemius is what it's called. But yeah, so to get a specific result, if you want your neck to be more flexible, you have to stretch your neck. Okay, so that's what specificity is talking about, is making sure you're stretching the muscle group that you want to have better flexibility with. Establish good habits. What you do determines your flexibility, what your flexibility is like. Poor posture and lack of flexibility can become permanent. So if you constantly sit, slumped like this, then your muscles are going to remember what this is like and start to think this is home. and those muscles will actually tighten up over time, and it'll be difficult to get back to a good posture like this. So if you want to have good posture, you have to practice good posture. The same goes for when you do different stretches. You want to make sure that you're stretching in a way that maintains a healthy posture as you do these different stretches. And then just lastly, flexibility is important, as we've kind of talked about. So to gain that, you want to stretch daily and test yourself often for improved function and improved health and wellness. So you can see here in this picture, this young lady is doing a what we call a sit and reach test, where her feet are up here against a special box, and her fingers, you can see right here where it starts, are going to typically be back here, and then she's going to push that little tab right there as far as she can forward while keeping her legs straight on the ground. A sit and reach test is a nice way to test your flexibility. And some students will only be able to push that bar to here. Some will be able to push it to where she has pushed it. And others, even yet, maybe out here past their toes a few inches. And, sometimes, obviously, you probably don't have a device like this sitting around your home. A lot of times, physical education departments at your high school or your junior high might have those. But you can typically make a box that's kind of like this and make kind of a way to measure this as well. So you could do this sit and reach test at home if you're looking to measure your increased flexibility. Some key vocabulary that we've learned that you need to know as you move forward when we talk about flexibility. Okay, first of all, ballistic stretching. We've discussed that. Dynamic stretching, flexibility, ligaments, muscles, overload, and then on this lacking from this slide is also tendons. You need to make sure you understand what tendons are. We also talked about the different types of joints. You'll need to know what those are as well. So your ball and socket joint, your hinge joints are kind of your two most common joints we see in the body. Tendons are down there. Static stretching, passive stretching, and then PNF. Okay, we will get into some key stretches in a future assignment. So as you work through this module and future modules, you'll be introduced to other things that can help you improve your flexibility. And then just to kind of wrap this up, in this lesson you learned what flexibility is. You learned to distinguish between different types of stretches. You learned how to test your own flexibility. Hopefully you learned how to recognize safety concerns while stretching, how to prevent sports injuries with stretching routines, and then how to set personal fitness goals. So this concludes our flexibility introduction. Hopefully you've been able to fill out your study guide if you were given one, and at this point when you're ready and you feel like you've mastered the information in this lab, you are welcome to move on to the quiz that's associated along with it.